Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And after a monster regular season with 120 victories and our fourth World Series title in the last 7 years, the offseason is finally underway today for our Oakland A's. Thanks to everyone in the worldwide scouting department who has shared thoughts on what we should consider doing in this upcoming offseason over the past few episodes. We have started to make some decisions to hopefully position our team for the fact that despite a monster season on the field and delivering a profit of almost $15 million to John Fisher, he actually cut our budget by $4 million for next year to $196 million, which is still 28th in all of baseball. So we are once again going to be resource constrained, but we have still managed to be pretty successful despite the limitations that Mr. Fisher's penny-pinching tendencies have put on our franchise over the years. And we have made 3 trades since the last episode, even though we haven't moved forward at all yet in the off-season. The goal of these trades has been to clean up our 40-man roster, clean up our 26-man roster, save some money, prepare ourselves for the Rule 5 draft, add a little bit of cash, or in some cases, this trade in particular that we're going to be talking about, add a ton of cash, which will help us for next year, and ultimately bring on some players who may fit better with our long-term direction for this club than the guys that we got rid of. So in this first trade, definitely got rid of some talent. The 26-year-old reliever Chad Evans, guy who has been up and down in Oakland the past couple of years, was very effective in a small sample size this year. Unfortunately, the 26-year-old is now out of options, and he's fragile physically. And given the depth we have in our bullpen, just did not see Evans as someone who was going to be guaranteed a spot on the 26-man roster. So we decided to try to extract some value from him. We also included the first baseman Alec Weddle. Alec's former draftee of ours. Picked him, actually was drafted in the second round by the Tigers, and then we picked him up actually just a few months ago. Okay, I'm thinking of somebody else when I started talking about Mr. Weddle, but regardless, Mr. Weddle was someone who we were going to need to protect on our 40-man roster to avoid potentially losing him in the Rule 5 draft. Pretty interesting contact hitter with a decent eye, but doesn't have a lot of power, average speed, and nothing special defensively. Do like those personality traits, including the captain personality. But again, ultimately, he was going to have to be protected on the 40-man roster ahead of the Rule 5 draft to ensure that we wouldn't lose him for nothing. And there was no guarantee that we were going to protect him. In fact, it was very unlikely that we were going to protect him, so we decided to try to monetize him now, so to speak. And last but not least, second baseman Kevin Stanaway. Solid-looking hitting prospect. Definitely can hit some home runs. Stanaway is a guy who we picked in the 4th round back in 2039. But given his very poor arm and his otherwise average defensive ratings as a infielder, didn't necessarily see a perfect spot for him. 6 foot tall with a bat that's got a little bit of pop, but nothing particularly special. Didn't really see first base even being a great fit for him. Already fragile physically, even though he's not even 22 years old. So 3 guys probably not in our long-term plans. Traded them to the Mets. Got some cash and got a minor league reliever in Danny Lazinski, a guy who is already fragile physically. We think his stuff could be absolutely electric with that incredible cutter, but wonder about his movement and control. But he's certainly a talented pitcher. And then the primary guy we picked up, 18-year-old minor league outfielder Jorge Nieves. Potentially very interesting contact hitter with decent gap power. Not going to hit a lot of home runs, not going to draw a lot of walks. Does have a potentially good influence in the clubhouse. Looks like a solid corner outfielder with average speed. Don't necessarily see either Nieves or Lazinski being a huge prospect, but given that Evans, Weddle, and Stanaway were not really in our long-term plans, at the very least we got younger via this trade, and we also picked up a lot of cash from the Mets, who had over $120 million to spend, so they were more than willing to throw in gobs of cash for us. Again, that just helps us with the upcoming season, but even when we spend that cash, it doesn't help with our P&L, so I'd rather have it than not, but it is certainly not a magic elixir for what ails these Oakland A's financially. Our second trade is one where there's probably a few more familiar names that were going to be included. The primary piece in this one, I don't know if he's the primary piece as far as his value, but the most familiar name is probably the catcher, Amari Cephas. You may remember we were thinking about having him as our backup catcher next year, given that we are a win-now team, and Ron Markley was so good as our backup catcher last year, and he's definitely got a better bat than Cephas and probably overall a better glove. We decided it made sense to continue on with Mr. Markley as our backup catcher. And given that we've got another good young catching prospect who's younger than Cephas now in AAA with Mr. Covarrubias, the international amateur free agent signing from a few years ago, felt like we could move on from Cephas to avoid a guaranteed contract and open up a spot on the 40-man roster. Greg Sockwell, who you may remember, he's a guy that we picked in the third round back in 2037. 24-year-old, is fragile physically, good contact hitter, good speed, nothing else really exceptional about him. He was an above-average offensive player last year in AAA, but don't necessarily see us having a spot on the 26-man roster for him. And he's another guy who was going to be eligible for the Rule 5 draft in about a month and a half, and there was no guarantee that we were going to put him on the 40-man roster. In fact, we probably were not. So we packaged him up. Mike Robbins, 24-year-old, similar to Evans, who we dealt away in the other deal, a good right-handed relief prospect in his mid-20s. Robbins put up a 2.79 ERA in AAA last year. Don't love moving on from him, but we've got a ton of good young relievers in our organization. Given his low stamina and his pretty putrid ability to hold on runners, didn't necessarily see him being a perfect fit for our bullpen. And then Brandon Coakley. This is another player who we had picked up in the draft. He was only a 9th-round pick in 2041. Still potentially an interesting prospect with some really good personality traits. Did not do great in his first full season in rookie ball this year, but still is a guy who on paper could have above average contact, gap power, and home run power, which is certainly an interesting combination. So some good major league ready talent and a prospect who could be an interesting major league player in a few years, sent to the Padres for smaller amount of cash, much smaller amount of cash, just $3.1 million compared to what we got from the Mets. And we picked up a 19-year-old pitching prospect, Edgar Alarcon. Don't necessarily think he's ace potential, but a really interesting young prospect. The 19-year-old only throws in the low 90s, but he's got good stamina, decent at holding on runners, potential 5-pitch arsenal. All of the pitches could be a bit above average, none of them expected to be exceptional. Ultimately, we think his stuff, movement, and control could all be a little bit above average. He was 1-7 with a 4.01 ERA in rookie ball last year. So he's got a lot to learn. But certainly, if all five of the players involved in this trade end up meeting their full potential, I think Alarcon has the highest ceiling. San Diego didn't value him nearly as high as we did, so feel like we definitely gave up a lot, because it's not inconceivable that all four of the guys that we gave up will be useful major leaguers. But I don't know that any of them that we gave up are likely to be above average major leaguers. And I think there is certainly, if he reaches his full potential, a path for Alarcon to be a above average major leaguer. So that's why we have brought him on board as well. And the third and final trade is the big one that we needed to do to open up some money to right size our payroll for next year and perhaps give us the opportunity to bring back one of our two starting pitchers who are going to be free agents. And that is a monster deal with the Colorado Rockies. Finally moved on from the promising second baseman Amari Alcindor. You look at his profile, very good defensively. He's got very good instincts on the base paths and a bat that looks like it could be average-ish to slightly above average. Unfortunately, in parts of 5 major league seasons at this point, he's been a bit below average in terms of his offensive production. Still a 2-WAR player over every 162 games that he's played, but starting to make more significant money going forward. And with some young middle infielders not too far off the major league level, felt like moving on from Alcindor made sense. Another 28-year-old, and this one hurts a little bit, Jesus Saldana, Trey Saldana, 3-time world champion, 2-time All-Star with us, was our ace of our rotation until not that long ago. This is a guy who we signed as an international amateur free agent over a decade ago, signed him to a long-term extension and expected he was going to be someone that we built around for the long term. Still signed for up to 4 more years. Unfortunately, after a very significant injury, that torn UCL that cost him most of 2041 and a good chunk of 2042, his stamina came back at an unacceptable level for him to be a true starter for us anymore. He's fragile as far as his injury proneness. And when we explored the development lab earlier today, the chances of him being able to successfully complete a program that would stretch out his stamina were very low. So we decided it made sense to keep Saldana and get that salary off the books. Ended up having a very nice, albeit brief, career for us. Won 13, 16, 10, and 14 games in his 4 full seasons in the majors. As I mentioned, was a 2-time All-Star. Even a year ago, he was 7-2 with a 3.39 ERA before he got hurt. Came back this year and worked out of the bullpen and eventually as our closer. But given the money he was making, felt like with him going to be turning 29 next season, fragile physically, didn't make sense to keep that contract on the books. And, another right-handed reliever in his mid-20s who looks like a pretty decent prospect. Danny Hubel. We included him also. Spent the last season and a half in AAA where he hasn't been particularly effective, but he does throw in the mid to high 90s, an outstanding slider. Still working on his stuff, but think he could be a useful right-handed pitcher out of the bullpen as well. So we packaged those 3 players together, and we got a 23-year-old left-handed pitcher in return, Macho Rangel, who will be competing for a spot at the back end of our rotation. Only 23 years old, as I mentioned. Don't love that he's fragile physically, but outstanding stamina, outstanding at holding on runners. 4-pitch arsenal, and we think his stuff, his movement, and his control are all a little bit above average. He's been in the majors for basically 3 full years at this point, led the National League with 15 losses this past season after going 16-1 a year ago. Has put up a 126 ERA plus and an 86 FIP minus with a 7.8 WAR. So think he could definitely be a missing link in our rotation. I would say at this point he would certainly be a favorite to be a 4th or 5th starter in the competition between himself, Dave Baumler, and Ernesto Comunez for those spots right now, assuming that Arriola will be back as our ace, and then the lefties Villarreal and Blumenshine will be our 2 and 3 starters. So I feel like we gave up a lot to give him, a lot to get him with a interesting relief prospect, a potential closer, and a very interesting infielder in the case of Alcindor. But the injury and or contract issues with the guys that we gave up were all kind of starting to become concerns for us, or in the case of Saldana's injury, certainly a major concern. Rangel, not a potential star. Don't love the fragility, but think he can still be a very solid back of the rotation starter for us for a few years to come. Rangel, unfortunately, is arbitration eligible, so he's going to be getting a little more expensive already. We've made an offer to him, and we also have made an offer to Ron Markley. Mentioned that with the trade away of Cephas, we were going to bring Markley back as our catcher next year. Similar defensively to Cephas, with a much better arm, and as we talked about, a bat that we think is better as well. And he was very productive as our backup catcher this last year. Given that we're a win-now team, felt it made sense to bring Barkley back. So with the trades away of Alcindor and Saldana in particular, along with the other moves, that has opened up some money for us to potentially seek a reunion for some period of time in the future with one of our big starting pitcher free agents, Mike Gallick or Doug Weiss. Again, with Comunez and Rangel and Baumler fighting for the last 2 spots in the rotation at this point. I don't think it's imperative that we bring one of them back. Certainly the trade for Rangel gives us a lot more flexibility to not get desperate. That being said, Gallick and Weiss were both key members of our pitching staff this past season, and they were both members of our 4-man rotation for the playoffs. So certainly having one of them potentially back on our terms is something that we would consider. Talked a lot, I think, in previous episodes and certainly in comments to recent episodes that Gallick, to me, is the more logical path. He's younger than Weiss. He's healthier than Weiss, a great influence in the clubhouse. Hasn't been quite as productive as Weiss over the course of his career, but with a 111 ERA plus and an 88 FIP minus, still has been a very good major league pitcher. Weiss, a guy who we picked in the 4th round out of Austin P 9 years ago, a little older, about a year and a half older than Gallick, as I mentioned, also fragile physically, doesn't throw quite as hard as Gallick, but ultimately is a bit better pitcher with a 126 ERA plus and a 75 FIP minus over the course of his career. The issue is that each of the last 2 seasons he has missed some starts due to injuries. Last time we checked in on Weiss and Gallick, they were actually both looking for similar money, $18.5 to $19.5 million a year. Gallick looking for 6 years and Weiss looking for 8 years. And it made it seem to me that the logical path was to pursue Mr. Gallick. Taking a look, we've got a ton of money available for this upcoming season if we were to pull scouting and player development down to bare bones. But you can see that barely gives us enough money to sign these guys to an extension of more than 1 year. So what I have been thinking is I would potentially like to bring one of these guys back. We are still in win now mode, and we do have the money to spend big on somebody for this upcoming 2043 season. So if either of these guys was potentially amenable to a somewhat front-loaded contract, that is a path that I'm willing to consider. And as it turns out, we've made the same offer to both of these pitchers, Gallick and Weiss. And although I thought Gallick was more reasonable in his demands, Weiss is the pitcher who has actually been more receptive to the offer that we've made. Offered them both the exact same offer, $24 million for this upcoming season, and then $15 million a year for the 4 years after that, with a player opt-out that we might hope they take after the 3rd year, and then a potential team option for the 5th season if they were to opt in and we felt we needed to get out. And interestingly, Weiss is willing to think about this offer. Gallick, as I mentioned, I gave him the exact same offer, and he is not willing to consider it. Still looking for about $19 million a year and still wants 6 years. So at this point, I think I'm going to make this offer to Weiss. He is a higher-end pitcher. The issue, of course, is his injury proneness, but he is a homegrown guy. He's actually more popular than Gallick, which may help on the margins in terms of the degradation to our fan interest that suffers if one or both of these guys leave. I don't love the fact that the options, or the key option after 3 years, is in Weiss's favor. If he pitches well for the next 3 years, he'll certainly opt out. I don't think he would opt back in for $15 million a year. But my thought with Mr. Weiss, even though I don't love to give a lot of player options out, the deals weren't going to get done without the player options, or I wouldn't have included them. And the fact that this contract is somewhat heavily front-loaded with $24 million for next year when we can afford it, and then just $15 million a year for up to 4 years after that, likely it's either a 2 or a 3 year contract. I would think it would be unlikely if he opts in after the 3rd year that we would then opt into the 5th year. So it's probably a 2 or 3 year deal at $15 million a year after this upcoming season. I think that's a contract that we would be able to trade away, not necessarily get a ton of value in return if things aren't going well for Mr. Weiss. And clearly there's always the fear with a guy who's fragile like him that it becomes a major issue. But he still ultimately is a pitcher who has pitched over 20 games for us as a starter for 5 straight years. And as I mentioned, ultimately been a pretty effective pitcher when he's been on the mound. Now, certainly in his late 20s and his 30-year-old season, these being the 2 injury-plagued seasons with his lowest WARs since his rookie year, aren't a great trend, but we'll do what we can to try to keep him healthy, and think that bringing Mr. Weiss back for next season is certainly a path to keep this team as competitive as possible. I'm a little surprised that Weiss is the guy I ended up with. I don't love it because of his fragility, but I do think that the front-loaded nature of it for this upcoming season, when we've got a lot of money to spend now with Saldana and Alcindor gone, and some of our big arbitration-eligible players not quite hitting their huge numbers, makes sense for us. And as I said, I think it's definitely a contract that we could trade to a higher budget team, similar to what we just did with Saldana if we felt we needed to get out of it at some point over the next couple of years. So we are going to submit that offer to Mr. Weiss, 5 years, up to $84 million total. As I said, really, after this upcoming year, it's 4 years, $60 million. So if he is healthy and productive, it is not a bad contract for us. Certainly the hope will be to get scouting and player development back to where we want them to be once we get him signed. And talking about player development, before we start moving forward over the next couple of weeks, as I've mentioned in the previous episode, I think it is not inconceivable that we could win the Mariano Rivera Rookie of the Year, Manager of the Year, Cy Young Award, and MVP in the American League this year with our player and or manager. I don't think we'll ultimately end up winning all 5 of those awards, but I think we have very creditable candidates for all 5. And given the monster regular season and monster postseason we're coming off, a clean sweep of the 5 big awards would just be the whipped cream on top of the sundae. I guess it would actually be the cherry on top of the whipped cream technically, but we'll see how we do in award season. But before we get to that, quick look at the development lab. Not surprisingly, we're going to be aggressive once again this year. A little more of an even mix between pitchers and everyday pitchers this year. Villarreal and Surgener working on endurance and velocity respectively. Rat Keach on strength and conditioning. And then a bunch of pitchers working on secondary pitch improvement, including Wilson Rangel, Mike Homer, Dozer Camunez, and Federico Ariola. The young outfielder Coy Simmons working on his gap power. Jonah Richards, a program that we don't do all that often, working on his running mechanics. We've got a few others working on that program also, including Darnell Selvey, Bobby Armstrong, plate discipline, Blumenshine, secondary pitch. Roque de la Paz, the interesting young lefty, we're going to try to add a pitch into his arsenal. Jacoby Manelli going to work on bat speed. The young catcher Covarrubias, who could be our backup by next year, going to work on his gap power. David Palomares, who we've made an extension offer to, going to work on his 2-strike approach. Jim West, bat speed. Marquis McAlpine, last year's first-round pick, plate discipline. Juan Big Thunder Ramirez working on running mechanics. He's our candidate for Rookie of the Year. And Phil Swenson going to work on plate discipline. We are actually probably going to take one of these programs. I'm guessing possibly Clank West, but maybe McAlpine, just being that he's so young, and ultimately give the new young addition to our roster, Macho Rangel, an opportunity to hopefully work on that off pitch, the splitter, to try to make his value even higher for us, since he'll likely be helping us over the near term. So with 3 trades completed, offers out to all of our arbitration-eligible players, and then the significant contract offer out to Mr. Weiss, and the long-term contract offer out to Mr. Palomares, it is time to finally start moving forward day by day in this off-season and find out how this award season will ultimately go for our world champion Oakland A's before we get to the salary arbitration hearings and the free agency filings. And with the offer outstanding to Weiss, it's conceivable that there may only be that one QO to Mr. Gallick when all is said and done, which is certainly a surprise from where I thought we might be in this off-season. And some of our arbitration-eligible players starting to sign. Jonathan Shearer and Dave Baumler are going to be back. And Doug Weiss, in what is a surprise from where I thought we might end up, is going to be returning with us in that front-loaded contract for the next several seasons. Big number for him in 2042, and then a more reasonable number after that if he's healthy and well. Certainly no guarantees for a soon-to-be 31-year-old who's fragile in terms of his injury proneness. But at the high end, he's certainly a bit more talented than Mr. Gallick. And he was also a little more willing to talk with us. Luis Godina will be back as he heads into his first arbitration-eligible season, along with the catcher Ron Markley, Darnell Selvey back as well, Macho Rangel, also getting some of our coaches signed, which is good. Although Isaiah Wright, who we're very interested in joining us, is looking for, I won't even say he's looking for a massive amount of money at this point. The only job that we can offer him is at our DSL team. And he clearly just doesn't really want to take that job, even though we did actually just offer him over $200,000 a year to coach our DSL team for the next 2 years. But he claims that he's got a better offer on the table from someone else. My assumption is it's not better in terms of the dollars, but it probably is better in terms of the level of the organization that he'll be coaching with. So we're probably going to have to move to a plan B for our pitching coach. Actually, it's our ACL team, not our DSL team. But regardless, we'll have to pivot a bit there, since it doesn't seem like we're likely to get the top pitching coach available on the market, unfortunately. And with Weiss now locked in, and those other signings that we've made, our fan interest remains somewhat over 100, I'm assuming, because we did pick up some gains there. With Weiss signed, we now don't have a ton of money to spend for this upcoming season, but that's fine. Puts our salaries at about $129 million, which isn't too far from where we were a year ago. Gonna increase by almost $60 million for the 2044 season, with some big arbitration numbers and some guys who are signed to long-term deals. So certainly we'll have another active offseason next year in terms of some potential cost cutting, but we will worry about that when we get to that point. And as award season is getting underway, the Mariano Rivera Award will be presented tomorrow. We think that our one-time closer, who ended up as our stopper towards the end of the year, Mr. Heilman, is going to be a real strong candidate for that award. Did kick award season off with a couple of Gold Glove winners. Darnell Selvey, our left fielder, wins the first Gold Glove of his career after what was a bit of an off year for him, but still a 142 WRC plus, so a very productive offensive season to go with a Gold Glove at this point. And in right field, Arturo Uresti won his third consecutive Gold Glove in right field. He had another vintage Uresti season, 33 homers, 122 ribbies, 126 WRC plus, and a 5 WAR. So he's been a Silver Slugger winner. He World Series MVP, 4-time World Series champion at the age of 29 here. Been an All-Star a couple times, and the 3 Gold Gloves illustrate his value both in the field as well as some of the other things he's done, particularly the Silver Slugger, and the fact that he's not yet 30 years old and he's closing in on 200 career homers. A very nice two-way player for us, who's actually even added pretty good efficiency on the base paths into his repertoire of skills over these past few years. And with all the arbitration-eligible players signed, David Palomares has also signed that extension. View him worst-case scenario as a very good utility infielder for us, and there's a chance between his defense, his durability, okay base running skills, and a bat that could be a little bit above average in terms of both contact and home run power, that maybe he makes a case to become a regular for us, or at the very least in a platoon situation going forward. Not a ton of money for Palomares, 10 years, $26 million, so he is going to be a potentially very reasonable signing for us if he works out well. Unfortunately, it looks like the dream of sweeping the Big Five awards is already over. Didn't get an email on the Mariano Rivera Award, which makes me know that we did not win it. We'll end up seeing how Mr. Heilman did. Wonder if us moving Saldana into the closer role, which cost Heilman the opportunity to lead the league in saves this year, could end up impacting him there. He actually was an incredibly strong candidate. He got 16 first place votes, more than anybody, but some of the other voters didn't have him as high. Eric Keach, his compatriot in the bullpen, finished fifth in the voting. But Heilman ends up second after a year. He was 6-1 with 36 saves. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong guy now. I'm looking at the actual winner, Jeff Stokes. 6-1, 36 saves, and a 1.98 ERA with a 2.4 WAR over 59 innings of work. Our guy, Joe Heilman, 7-4, 34 saves, league best 79 games, 18 holds, and a 2.95 ERA with 138 strikeouts and 94 and 2/3 innings in the bullpen, 2.9 WAR. Guess you can make a case for either of them. Honestly, I would probably go on with Heilman, and certainly the majority of voters put him first place. But looks like there are some people who had Heilman materially lower on their ballot. And Jeff Stokes of the Tampa Bay Rays is your Mariano Rivera Award winner for 2042. So the Silver Sluggers, though, a lot of hardware coming to the Oakland A's for that award. Catcher Jonah Richards, who we think is our prime MVP candidate, led the American League with a .431 on-base percentage, also hit .324, 32 homers, and 101 ribbies. Luis Godina at first base led the AL with a .335 batting average and a .177 WRC+. He is, if Richards is our 1A MVP candidate, Godina is 1B. Juan Pimentel, in what was a little bit of an off year for him with only a 117 WRC+, still hit 32 homers, 98 ribbies, and hit .290, and wins his second Silver Slugger at third base. And last but not least, for the second straight year, Arturo Uresti, back-to-back Gold Glove and Silver Slugger award. After hitting .256 with 33 homers and 122 ribbies, he is your Gold Glove and Silver Slugger award winner for the American League in right field here in 2042. And I actually think we almost have stronger cases for MVP with Richards or possibly Godina and the Cy Young Award with Mr. Arriola than we might for Rookie of the Year. Our excellent young designated hitter, Mr. Ramirez, I think is our strong candidate for that award. But I thought he was going to be the weakest link. Obviously, we already haven't won the Mariano Rivera Award, so I was wrong about that. But Rookie of the Year was the one that I thought we probably had the lowest chance of winning of the major awards. And I was right in my assessment that that might be a difficult award for us to win, and I was obviously way too biased for our buddy Juan Ramirez. Think there's definitely a not voting for a DH element that worked against Big Thunder, because 261 average with 41 homers and 134 ribbies is a monster rookie season, and he actually finished fifth in the voting. Eric Svaldson of the Boston Red Sox, left fielder, led the AL with 139 runs and 208 hits. Overall, hit .330, 15 homers, 64 ribbies, a 141 WRC+, and a 6.1 WAR. Big time season for the left fielder, who was also named an All-Star. Certainly can't complain about losing the award to Svaldson. Over in the National League, Jesus Lara of the Mets is your Rookie of the Year. led the league with 148 walks and a 442 on-base percentage. He has one of those incredible eyes. Looks like he could be in the Juan Soto, Ricky Henderson, Barry Bonds, Ted Williams kind of range in his ability to draw walks. And in a unsurprising piece of news, Kip Wells, after a 120-win season, is the manager of the year. He has been the manager since 2029 when we promoted him from AAA and won the first of our 5 World Series championships. And he is now a 6-time American League Manager of the Year. He's won it every year that we've won the World Series, and then also in 2039 when we had a 99-win season. And getting to the big awards, Cy Young Award in the National League goes to Andy Grimes for a 3rd consecutive season, even though he was only 9-8 this year after leading the league in wins with 20-plus win seasons 2 straight years. Still led the league in innings pitched, strikeouts, whip, strikeouts per 9, FIP minus, and WAR. And he easily outpoints Mike Ramsey, the brilliant two-way player from the Braves, who did lead the National League with 20 wins this past year, as well as leading the league in ERA, to claim his 3rd consecutive Cy Young Award. And Federico Arriola, a unanimous Cy Young Award winner, and he has now got 2 consecutive Cy Young Awards, led the league in wins, ERA, and WHIP for a 2nd consecutive season, and also led the league in walks per 9, FIP minus, and WAR as he pitched his way to an outstanding playoff record this year. Went 4-0 in his 5 starts with a 2.84 ERA for us. Over his career, Arriola 7-3 with a 2.64 ERA in the postseason. Starting to potentially make some pretty big money after this upcoming season. He's looking for a huge extension, so he may be someone that we, in all likelihood, just let play out his arbitration years. But certainly happy to see Arriola with a Cy Young Award, and as we've talked about, I think there's a pretty decent chance that we will see a MVP award for an Oakland Athletic tomorrow. And although Mike Ramsey was the runner-up for the Cy Young Award, the brilliant two-way player did just capture the 7th most valuable player award of his career. As we talked about already, he led the National League with 20 wins and a 2.76 ERA. And at the plate, he hit .260, 27 homers, and 89 ribbies, put up a 4.4 WAR as a position player, as Ramsey continues to put together an absolutely ridiculous career. And our buddy Jonah Richards did win the American League Most Valuable Player Award. He was the Rookie of the Year a season ago, MVP this year. That's a pattern that we've had with the likes of Juan Pimentel in recent seasons as well. So nice to see Richards duplicating that. Luis Godina from our team finished 3rd in the voting. Darnell Selvey, Federico Arriola, the aforementioned Pimentel, Juan Ramirez, among other Oakland A's who received votes for the award. The runner-up was Frank Montalvo of the White Sox. The shortstop led the American League with 58 home runs and 142 ribbies while hitting .280, put up a 5.7 WAR. So the 24-year-old Montalvo edged by the 25-year-old Richards for the American League Most Valuable Player Award this year. I think they may have been both up there in the voting for the Rookie of the Year a season ago also, when Richards also got one over on Montalvo. So all in all, a pretty fruitful award season for our Oakland A's. The AL MVP, AL Cy Young Award, AL Manager of the Year, a couple of Gold Gloves, and 4 Silver Sluggers when all was said and done. So we'll keep moving forward. Got salary arbitration hearings in about a week and free agency shortly after that. and then we will finish up this episode. Probably not going to be particularly active in free agency this year after the contract offer we made to Weiss to bring him back and the trade to add Rangel into the mix of our rotation for next year as well. And we've gotten all of our players signed, so no salary arbitration hearings today. Two big free agents, Gallic, who we've talked about, we're going to submit a qualifying offer to him, and then we'll also take a hit down the line when the first baseman, Galterio Mancina, who we picked up as a rental for the stretch, ultimately departs for somewhere willing to pay him much more than we were able to. And not surprisingly, given his reticence to sign with us for the same terms that we ended up signing Weiss with, Gallic has filed for free agency. We'll find out who joins him in the free agent market tomorrow. And before we take a look at the top experienced free agents, we'll take a look at the international free agent market. Always potential for something interesting here. Certainly the closer, Yasuro Nakamura, old cheese, the 29-year-old left-hander out of Japan. Looks like he could be a absolutely incredible closer, looking for about $12.5 million a year. So not sure that we'll be able to add him into the mix. Interesting shortstop also, Koji Fukuda Grumbles, switch-hitting 30-year-old shortstop, respectable glove, a lot of home run pop in the bat, and a pretty good personality. Not looking for crazy money, at a little more than $10 million a year. Right fielder Alejandro Armas, looks like he could be a bat with a little bit of pop, also looking for around $10 million. And then the big free agents, not surprisingly, Galterio Mancina and Mike Gallic among the best. A couple others, Mike Boyette, a starter, right fielder Wilson Cuestas, Creole Cuestas, 30-year-old outfielder, put up a 138 WRC plus last year for Texas, wrecked physically, looking for pretty good money. Bob Garton, a reliever. Eric Wingert, starting pitcher. Don't love the personality of Wingert. Was 9-10 with an ERA just over 4 last year for the Cincinnati Reds. John Tatgenhorst, veteran first baseman, certainly a bat that could help most lineups, but our lineup doesn't need a ton of help, especially when it's expensive and older. Center fielder Chris Hendren would certainly be a interesting player to bring on board. Solid defensively, great speed, and a decent bat. But he's wrecked physically, looking for over $25 million a year. That's not going to work. Steve Wirtz, an excellent catcher, but we've got the American League MVP behind the plate for us, who's much younger. And then Ishmael Carrera, probably the top starting pitcher on the market. Only 8-9 for the Padres last year with a 4.66 ERA, but still did lead the league in strikeout to walk ratio. The 12-year veteran looking for some pretty significant money also. So as we sit here for the beginning of the postseason, we've got some money to spend on a 1-year contract. But with the fact that we have brought Weiss back on board, unlikely to be significant players as free agency gets underway. But we'll visit the market in a little more depth and also start moving forward in the offseason, planning for the Rule 5 draft and seeing if we can keep this franchise moving in the right direction when we get to our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.